Sunday's Daf is Daf Zayin. So the Gemara continues. Itmar, we learned. We had a number of qualifications before from Rav when we said if you did a chatas, we were talking about shini, if you shim shem kachim or shina bailim. So we had Rav said before that if you bring the chatas, right? If you bring a chatas with shaloi l'shmoi, the chatas is possible. But if you had in mind another carbon chatas, then it's all right. Chatas chaylev, and you had in mind chatas dam, it's all right. If you had in mind an oila, that's called shinui shem. You change the name. But when it comes to shinui bailim, the wrong person, it's exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. And that is, if you had in mind another person, when you did the carbon, you had in mind another person. If the other person was doing a chatas, doesn't matter if it's a different kind of chatas, but a chatas, then it ruins the animal because you're similar to each other. But if you had in mind a person who's bringing a carbon chayiv, a carbon oila, then it does not ruin your chatas because it's loy mina. It's not the same. It's not the same. So says the Gemara here, we learned, if you shechted a toida for the toida of your friend, is kosher. What do you mean a toida for the sake of your friend? So this is very splitting hairs. We're talking here about shinui kodesh. You change the animal. If you shechted a toida and had in mind the toida of your friend, that's not changing the animal, that's changing the person, the owner. So Rashi explains at length here, it's talking about, you have yourself in mind, not your friend in mind, but you have a carbon taida is brought for 4 different possibilities. You went out of jail, you were very sick, right? You crossed the sea, you went through a midbar and you survived. So the reason why I'm bringing a taida is I traveled through a midbar and I survived. My friend is bringing a taida because he was released from jail. So if I brought my taida, but I had in mind the reason of my friend, but it's still for me. So there's no shinei bailim here. It's for me, but it's shinei shame. Even though it's still a carbon taida, but for a different reason. I'm using his reason for the carbon, not my reason. So Rabbah says it's kosher. Why is it kosher? Because it's still a carbon taida. It's the same. It's not really a shinei shame. And Avchida says possible. Gemara explains. Rabbah says kosher toida shem toida shchada. You did it on a toida. Good, it's all right. And Avchida says possible. Why? Because l'shum shlamim didei nishkatabina. You have to have in mind the right reason for a carbon toida, and you did not have the right reason. Taisus gives a different reason why over here is shaded. Okay, not important. Let's just learn the word we're learning. Amar Rabbah says Rabbah. So Rabbah comes along and says, Mino amin Allah. How do I know that as long as you had in mind a toida, even though it's slightly different, it's still kosher? How do I know? The time we learned, it says in the pasuk, the pasuk says, Upsar zevach toidas. What we had before already. It says in the pasuk, and the meat of a zevach of a carbon, toidas shlamim. So we learned before that if you did a toida and you had in mind a shlamim, it's good enough because a toida is a shlamim. But if it was supposed to be a shlamim and you had in mind a toida, it's not good enough because a shlamim is never called a toida. So now he uses that brisa to prove his point. How? The time you learn, the day you brought the zevach. Come to teach you, if you could toida, and you had in mind a carbon shlamim, it's kosher. Or but a shlamim, if you took a carbon shlamim, and you had in mind a toida, is possible. Now, why should it be different? Why should it be any different? So we answer, you know why it's different? Toida kruya shlamim. We find the toida right here says toida shlamim. So a carbon toida can be referred to as a shlamim. Shlamim is a more generic name. But ain't shlamim kruya toida. But a carbon shlamim is never referred to in the toida as a carbon toida. So therefore, it's like you change the name of the carbon and it's possible. Shlamim. So now we make an inference. This is the big chiddush. You took a shlamim, even though it's similar to a taida in a way, it's a Thanksgiving. The dinim are different, but it's similar in concept. But because a shlamim is never called a taida, it's not possible. So the Gemara says shlamim taida. Therefore, it is possible because he changed the name. Sounds like the mirror, but hot taida l'shem taida. If the din would be like you said, like Reb Chizda, that if you made a taida and the taida was supposed to be because you went out of jail and you had in mind, or the kohen had in mind a different one of the 4 people that have to be hoida, and if you're going to say that is also possible, what would be a bigger chiddush? To take a shlamim and make it a taida, or take a taida and make it a taida, but for the wrong reason? Of course, that would be a bigger chiddush. So why does Rabbi Lezer say that? Hot toida l'shem toida sheda. My love, what do you mean a toida l'shem toida is kosher? My love, the chavre. You had in mind the miracle that took place for your friend instead of the miracle that took place to you, and we see here clearly that is possible. See here clearly it's kosher. When is it possible a shlomim for the sake of a toida, but a toida for the sake of a toida is kosher? Says Gemara, no. Who told you your friends? You're talking about the day, talking about your own. Talking about your own. And even though, that it's not exactly the same mess that happened to you, but I'm thinking about myself. I'm not thinking about my friend, and therefore it's kosher if you changed it. So what do you tell me? But if it's your friends, if you thought about your friend, he was just saved, and that's what I'm going to do over here, psula. So then my question still remains: why does the Rebbe Lezer limit to a carbon shlomim? And you had in mind Torah, which is a complete change is possible. Make a bigger chiddush. At least the Torah l'shem Torah. Say that if you made a Torah and you had in mind your friend's Torah and for yourself. It's possible to be a much bigger chiddush, even though this l'chayda superficially they're pretty similar, and yet it's possible. And automatically I would know surely shlomim l'sheitayda is possible. So we answer no. When we say shlomim l'shem tayda, we're talking about your own. You have a chiva shlom, you have a chiva tayda. Shlomim l'shem tayda day, and we're talking about you decided to make your own tayda. You have a shlom and a tayda, and you had in mind the wrong thing. It's like we would have thought I would have thought that the names are interchangeable. But the Torah says Torah Shlomov. The Torah says Torah Shlomov. The it's the same. If you had the Chil of Shlomim and you then made it for a Torah, I would have thought it's good enough because the Torah calls it Torah Shlomov. It's a different which way you go. Kamash and that's the Chiddush. Pshat. That's the Chiddush here. That even though a Torah is called a Shlomim is not called a Torah. So there's no proof to Rabbah or to Rav Chizda. Say one further. Rabbah is going to give us now a whole series of halach. Some of them we had before in the name of the Rabbah or whatever, but now Rabbah gives a whole series of dinim.
Ramatul, I mean, why is it in some places you're able to apply a principle of hekesh? So if the Torah is called the Shlomim and the Shlomim is there and right next to, why can't we go backwards and forwards?
Because it says Torah das Shlomim, the Torah of your Shlomim. So it's clearly the Torah saying that the Torah is part of the Shlomim family. So the Shlomim is a general, and the Torah is one prat of it. So you can take a prat and also refer to it by the general rule, but you cannot take the general and use it for a prat, which is not the general. If you had to give the general thing, you cannot use a prat. It's not a hekesher. It's like the wrong thing.
Yeah, thank you.
I can't think of an example right now in the moment, but generally speaking, a prat is part of a klal. A klal is not part of a prat. Omar versus Rava. Chatas, din number one. Chatas sheshachter l'shem chatas ksheidem. If you had in mind, we had this before. If you shechter a chatas for the sake of a chatas, in other words, your chatas is supposed to be for treifa fats, and you had in mind a chatas for blood. Since they're both a chatas very similar, they get karas, whatever, it's kosher. It's not called shina shem. You didn't change that. Not shina. It's not shina kodesh. Ksheida. But if you had in mind the shem oila, if you had in mind another carbon altogether, an oila, then possible. Then that's possible because that's shini kodesh. My timer, why? How do I know that? How do I know that if you had in mind the wrong chatas is still kosher? Because it says the passing was shachat oisa lechatas. When you shecht it, you have to have in mind a chatas. You had in mind the chatas. That's good enough. L'shem oila psula. But if you had in mind an oila, then you didn't do it for the sake of a chatas, it's possible. That's din number one. Din number two. Well, my Rabbi says, chatas sheshachta. But if you shechted the chatas for another person, this is called shine bailim, not for yourself, but for another person. And here the rule is exactly the opposite. Psula, it is possible. If you shechted for another person who's chayiv a chatas, then you had the wrong person in mind. It's possible. But but if that other person is chayiv and oila, it's kosher. Like we said before, if it's lav mina, if it's not the same, then it has no connection to this carbon, it has no bearing on it. It doesn't interfere in this carbon. My timer, that was the logic we gave before, but then we also brought a pasuk. We had some issues with the logic. My timer, what's the reason there? Because it says a pasuk, v'chiper olav hakoyin mechatosei. It says the kohen will forgive you from your chatas. Olav you, v'loya chaver, not your friend who is similar to you, even though he also has to bring a chatas, but it's olav only on you. So it has to be similar. Chaver doing that, the friends like you. He has to be chayiv a carbon like you. That's din number 2. Din number 3. Omar says, what about chatas sheshochter? You shechter a chatas al mi she'ena mechuyev klum. You shechter a chatas on somebody that has no obligation of bringing a chatas. In other words, psul is possible. Why is it possible? Because there's no such person. There's no such person that has no obligation to bring a korban. There isn't a person as we say in the pasuk, "Ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher yaseh tov v'lo yachted." There's nobody perfect that never does any avera. So therefore, everyone is high. There's no such person who you can say, "I'm bringing this korban for a person that doesn't exist." That's a person. Amar Rav, and the Gemara will soon explain this. The next correct how it is. Amar said, "Rav, chatas mechaperes al chayove asay." Rav comes along and says that if somebody that a korban chatas forgives for loisasa and averes of chorus, so if you did a b'shayik, so surely chatas will atone for an asay. If you did an aveda, a lesser aveda, surely a korban chatas will forgive for that. Chatas mechaperes achayove asay mekavachayim. A chatas, so therefore somebody who's chayiv and asay is like similar to you. Is like similar to you. So a chatas is mechaper on those who are chayiv and asay kavachayim. What's a kavachayim? A chayove krisis mechaperes achayove asay lekoshke. If we can forgive you for an aveda, loisasa, which is chayiv kares, if you did it on purpose, surely it forgives you for an asay. Now l'chayda comes out. So it comes out that remember the bas minu. So it comes out that an asay can be included in the korban chatas. So therefore, if you have in mind someone who's chayv and oila is similar, and the chayda should be possible. We have a problem. Rava just said before that if you had in mind someone else will bring the korban chatas, it ruins the korban. Shini bailim. But if you had in mind somebody's chayv and oila, it does not ruin the korban, because it's lav bas mina. Now you tell me, Rabbi, that if you bring that a korban chatas forgives for an asay, which means that the person who's bringing oil is really similar to the person bringing a chatas. So how come we say that that is kosher? It should be possible. So the Gemara, you said the chayiv oil kosher, and the reason was because it's lav bas mina. It's a different carbon. But now you tell me that a chatas includes asay, so it's a very similar carbon. So the Gemara. So Gemara is saying, we're talking about over here, in the same expression we had yesterday, we're talking about over here is that he already set aside a korban oila. So mikiva le mechapra, mikufia mechapra. Once this person set aside a korban oila, then all of his avedas, I say, are included in that oila. And because that's the main kavua, that's the main korban for an asay. So at that stage, my chatas has no connection to any asay. But if the person did not set aside a korban to bring for his asay, then mekufia, it's floating atop, then my chatas is connected to the asay. It's like the peripheral. So again, we had it before, that is sort of an in-between step. If you did something to fix up your asay, you set aside a korban oila, then your korban is, my chatas has no connection to your asay. Because I'm just a floating thing. If there's a problem, I'm floating, I can fix it up. There's nothing floating because you already took care of it, or you're about to take care of it. So it's already connected to your korban. So then I have no connection to you. You're lav bas mina. So then if I had you in mind, it doesn't pass on my chatas. But if you did not set aside a korban, you didn't set aside, then your asays are there, then my chatas is connected to your asay. Then you consider bas mina. And if I had in mind a person who's chayiv and oila, and who didn't aveda say is chayiv and oila, who knows it's chayiv and oila, then my korban chatas would be possible. And why? Because it's similar. So if I say for a person who has what do you call it? If I say a person that is not chayiv kum, because he's definitely chayiv and asay is similar to me, to my carbon, and therefore it's possible. Says about it further, another did. Rava says, if let's say you shechted an oile and you did not have a mind lishma, is also lizik dama shaloi lishma. You're not allowed to continue and say, well, I started loy lishma, I'll continue loy lishma. Everything else has to be done correctly. I can either tell you based on a pasuk, or I can tell you based on a swara. A game of crowd we already had before, that even though you messed up, you still have to continue bringing it properly. Moitzis Vasecha Tishma, right? You start off being a neder. It says Vasisa Kashen Nadarta, fulfill your original commitment. But if it doesn't work out, then then continue bringing it as an adava, but exactly the way it was meant to be. That's the pasuk. But because you made one change, you should change everything else. No. Now that you realize what you made a mistake, you got to continue to do the right way. Like I said in the beginning of the parak. Next did. We learned before about a woman who a Yeledis, Isha Yeledis, she gave birth, so she has to bring a carbon chatas and a carbon oila. If she already brought the carbon chatas, because once she died, you can't bring a chatas anymore. But if she already brought the chatas, and there's an obligation now for an oila, and then she died, her children have to bring up the carbon oila. We had the whole discussion whether the children actually have ownership in it or not. But the children have to bring up her oila. So Rava says, oila habola chamisa. That oila that the children have to bring up on behalf of their mother. Shachta b'shinu kodesh, if they shechted it and had in mind the wrong carbon, psula, it is possible. And they have to bring now another carbon. Now, why they have to bring another carbon is, places in the beginning of Masechta said, according to one view, it's because she buddha the raisa, there's an obligation there, and therefore you have to take from her assets and replace it. But Bishine Bailim, once she passed away, if they had in mind the wrong person, not their mother or someone else, traded, because really they only bring it because of an obligation. There's no Bailim event. She's no longer alive. There's no Bailim. It doesn't matter. They Bailim Misa. There's no Bailim after Misa. But we also had before in a view of Rav Pinchas Berei Ravami. He said that the children can use this carbon for their own Averis. So they are the Bailim. Even though we had a discussion more before that there's no Bailim, children have no Bailis, they don't own it, but or they're sort of in between. But the Pinchas, the son of Ami, said there is Bailim la Chamisa because the children now are the Bailim and they can use it for their carbon. Let me clarify what you're saying here. The Ramami, Dafka Kamar, are you saying Dafka? Now what? Are you arguing with Rava and you hold that no, that if there was Shini Bailim, you have to bring another one because there are Bailim there, the children of the Bailim. Yes, Bailim Lachamisa, Uboila Sirafin, you got to bring another carbon. I deal with the Kamasega. Oh, what you're saying here is sort of in between, a state of flux. You're saying that no, you don't have to bring another carbon. But if the carbon is there, the children can be Yosef with this carbon also for all the Avedas that they did, they don't have to bring their own. I'm like, no, Dafka come in. I'm arguing with Rava. I hold that the children are the owner now, the heirs are the owner, and therefore they, if they change the Bailam, they got to bring another carbon. Rava says, Rava, another thing, Oila, he says, the way a carbon, why Taka can you bring one carbon Oila for many Avedas? Carbon Chatas, you can only bring one carbon per Aveda. So why should it be, when it comes to an Oila, you can bring one Oila for many Avedas? So Rava, I'll tell you why. Oila doinu. Oila is not the kapara. The kapara is tshuva. The kapara is tshuva. So what's the oila for at all? The oila is purely if my battery dies. Just wait a second. I'll put my phone on. He says the oila is a doinu. It's a present. It's a present to Hashem for accepting our tshuva. Hey chidami. Because how does it work? If there's no tshuva, Zevachim Daf, what helps the carbon oila? If the carbon of Rishayim is not accepted, it's abomination. And if you did tshuva for an Aveda Asay, Vatanya, we learned. Over a mitzvah Asay, V'shav, you did Aveda and you did tshuva, you don't leave until they meichel you. So what's the purpose of the oil at all? Shema min adoyinu, it's a gift. And therefore, because it's a gift, therefore you can use it for many Asays. Tanya Hachos up in the Brisa. Amar Shem and Chatos Lamabal. What is the Chatos? More that's question Lamabal. The Chatos, of course, to tell you. And the Lamabal of Ne'oila. Why is it every time you bring two kabbanas, first you bring the Chatos, then you bring the oil? Except we had one exception. Why? Because you know why? It's as if a praklit, the one who intervenes, and you're the advocate, shenichnes that goes into and your behest and try to defend you, and then nichnes der nachrav. Once he achieves whatever he achieved, reads a praklit nichnes der nachrav. Once he achieved whatever he achieved, you're appeased. Now you bring a present as a gift. That's what carbon is. Then the Mishnah said, chutz la pesach chatzas. The two exceptions that the pesach and the chatas are an exception that if you did it loy lishma, they're actually possible. Not like the other kabbalas we said. Says the Gemara. Says the Gemara. Pesach Minolan. How do you know about Pesach? It's possible. The Chsiv says Shemoyres Chodesh Aviv. You should at that time of the season Vasisa Pesach, and you should make it a korban Pesach, which means Sheyir Kol Asi Oisav L'Shem Pesach. You should do it exactly. That by a Pesach do exactly means if you didn't do it properly, not only didn't you do the mitzvah, but it's actually possible completely. Okay, so we see from here. How do you see from there? You know, a rule in Kachim is that any din that says about Kachim, it's only lechatchila. If the Torah wants to tell you that if b'di'evet he didn't do it, it's also possible. Shana olav hakasav la'akev. The Torah has to repeat it twice. So we learned already from the pasuk before Zois HaTorah La'oila and all that. We learned already in the pasuk before that all the kabbanas require you have to do lishma, but because we have a second pasuk specifically by Pesach, so this is like a repetition. Shana olav hakasav, and therefore even by the evidence of current Pesach did it right, it is possible. Okay, so Ashkan, all we know from here is Shina Kodesh, that if you change the carbon, what about Shina Bailam? I don't know if you had the wrong person in mind. How do you know that also over there we say that it's no good? The Chsiv, it says in Pasuk Martim, it says in Pasuk Martim Zevach Pesach Hula Hashem. So I watch it. Hey, Zvichel Shem Pesach. When you shecht it, you have to have in mind the Pesach. So this is a third pasuk telling you don't change the carbon, but we don't need it. And see, we don't even need it for as a second time. We already have that. So we then say im eina inyan l'shina kodesh. It's really, we don't need it to tell you don't change the carbon itself. So we need l'shina bailim. Therefore we say we attribute it to shina bailim. Okay, so Gemara ashkon the mitzvah. So when it comes to shina bailim, we only have one pasuk. One pasuk says don't have somebody else in mind. If only one pasuk by kachim, it's only lechatchila. It's the mitzvah. How do you know by shina bailim that it's ma'akiv? On Makro, there's another pasuk. It said the other pasuk was Zevachim Pesach Lashem Elakecha. You should check another pasuk telling you again you have to have the right carbon in mind. Again, it's extra. It's for Pshina Bailim. So now you have two psukim Pshina Bailim. He's masculine of Safra. Safra has a question. Hi, is Zevachim Hochi Yosef? Is that what the Zevachim come? This last pasuk you just mentioned is coming for that. Hi, Baile, we need it for Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman, Rav Uam. How do you know? This is the big chiddush that Lamoiser Pesach Shekodesh. What happens? You missed the carbon Pesach. You set aside two animals, and so you had an animal, you lost it. You brought another animal, and you found it. What do you do with that animal? A carbon Pesach turns into a carbon shlama. After chatzos, it turns into, or after night, it turns into a carbon shlama. Lamoiser Pesach Shekodesh. How do you know? Shneimar it says v'zavachta Pesach LaHashem Elokech. Right, Shech Deibusha, and then it said Tzoinu Boker. Now we know that the animals you can use on Pesach are only sheep and goats. Where does bakar, cattle, come into it? There's no such carbon Pesach with cattle. The only carbon that you can use, male, female, animal, whatever you want, is a carbon shlamim. So we're talking about shlamim here, but it starts with Pesach. That means what happens to the remnants of a Pesach? It turns into a shlamim. He said Pesach is talking goats and sheep. The leftover Pesach, what happens? It turns into another carbon which can be used, which you can use for it, bakar and tzayin. What is that shlamim? So this pasuk is not extra at all. So we go back to our question, shini bailim, how do you know that it's ma'akiv? That if you didn't do the Pesach right bailim, that Pesach is possible. You're right. Zavachta Pesach, we use it for Rav Nachman's din to tell you that it turns into a shlamim. Shemoy as Chodesh Aviv is the mitzvah, and the first pasuk we brought Shemoy as Chodesh Aviv is for mitzvah b'shina kodesh. The second pasuk we brought is b'shina bailim the mitzvah, and then it says who. It says in the pasuk there about Martin Zeva Pesach who is very limiting. This is how it should be. So
Hello? I think his battery must have died.
We lost him for a sec. He's coming back.
So who is coming to say that it's ma'akiv? This is how it has to be, and that's what we learn from the word who. And that what whether you change the bialim, whether you change the animal itself, they're all possible. Says the Gemara. Okay, so please. Who's la'akif? Bein haba, bein hachav hachav. Shina bailim, shina kodesh. We learn from the word who that if you don't do it correctly, the animal is possible. Current Pesach is possible. All you know here is amartim zevach. Okay, the activity of zvicha has to be done correctly. How do you know the other activities by Korban Pesach? If you, let's say, you sprinkle the blood wrong, or you carry the blood, and you had it for the wrong carbon or for the wrong carbon, I know this disqualifies the carbon. And it seems from the Mishnah that any activity, any of the four Avedas, disqualify the Korban Pesach. Hoyil, so he answers, Hoyil v'goli goli. Once you know that it's possible by Zvicha, then we say automatically everything else is possible as well. Hoyil v'goli goli. Once it's revealed, it's revealed. Rav Ashi says no. Who says Hoyil v'goli goli? No such thing. Where the Torah applies the rule, that's where it applies, and where it doesn't, it doesn't. No such thing as Hoyil v'goli goli. Ella, so the Gemara says, Avodas min olam. So how do we know all the other avodas? It says in the pasuk, Zeis haTorah la'olah lemincha. You can see from the whole approach of the Gemara, we don't like using that pasuk, Zeis haTorah la'olah lemincha, as a first resort. We'd rather find sort of localized limudim to teach you for Korban Pesach, for any carbon. How do you know this is possible, this is disqualified? If we couldn't, then we have to go back to and say, well, we'll use this generic pasuk, Zeis haTorah. So we'll say that we know the mitzvah is from the Psukim Korban Pesach, and for Zeis HaTorah, which compares all the kabbalas to each other, teaches you to be ma'akiv. The Tanya, we learned in a Braisa that b'yayim tzavoisai, it says, b'yayim tzavoisai, that Moshe told the Eden, b'yayim tzavoisai b'nei Yisrael, to bring the kabbalas, l'hakir karbaneim. What carbon talking about? Zeb choir, Umaisa Pesach. So the next pasuk there, after it says Zeis HaTorah la'olah, in that pasuk of Zeis HaTorah la'olah, it doesn't mention Korban Pesach at all. But the following pasuk it says Hashem told Eden to bring Karbanom. What are you adding now? You already mentioned all the kabbalas. All those kabbalas that were not mentioned in the previous pasuk, but it's contiguous to the previous pasuk, are these other kabbalas. For example, B'choir, which is not mentioned, Meiser Behema, the 10th animal is not mentioned, and the Korban Pesach not mentioned. And we learn from here, Hikishu Hakasav l'Shlam. They're also compared to Shlamim. Shlamim, just like Shlamim, Beishida Koyed, Beishida Ba'il, Bina L'Mitzah, just like about Shlamim, we need at least a Chatchila. You should have the right carbon in mind, the right bialim. We said, but the Evid, you still bring the carbon, just you want Yotze, is af kol bein shina kodesh bein shina ma'in lemitzah. So from there you learn out lemitzah everywhere else. Then we look into the Korban Pesach, ukeshlamim like a shlamim. And we go further. Ma shlamim bein zvicha b'shavay b'shlamim. There's no difference which avodah. All four avodas you have to do it right. Lechalakta ben lemitzah. So av Pesach lechalakta ben also. So Korban Pesach also we make no distinction between the malachas. But all we know from that pasuk is that lechatchila you have to do it right. How do we know about Korban Pesach that even b'di'evid it's possible? Since we have these other psukim that we mentioned that it's superfluous, that you have to have in mind the Korban Pesach, you have to have in mind Korban Pesach, and it's extra. So we said one is for Shini Bailim and one is for Shini Shem, and it's repeated again to be Ma'akiv. So that's how we know. We combine the two together. Elohu Lamali. So what do you need who for? Now that you told me that basically we're learning out from the fact that it says Zeis HaTorah la'olah, we learn from there. And now that you're telling me that it's like we learn from Zeis HaTorah la'olah, and the fact that they have two psukim by Korban Pesach between that, we know that not only lemitzah but it's ma'akiv, that you have to have all the four avodas with the right kavanas. So the word who that you said before is telling you, hey, this has to be, seems to be redundant. Lamali. So we answer to teach another din. Because Tanya we learned Nemar bePesach b'shchita la'akiv is telling you only by Pesach if you don't do it correctly it's possible. Aval osham lo'inema by who, but by a carbon osham. Even though you have the word who, where is the word who written by carbon Pesach? Said by Martin Zevach Pesach at the stage of shchita. Where is the word who written by carbon osham? Only after you roasted the fats on the mizbech, and it says there that osham hu. And since the b'chlal roasting the fats on mizbech is not that it's a mitzvah, but if you didn't do it, the animal is still kosher. And there it says who, so therefore we know that it's still kosher. Mashenke by carbon Pesach. So we're not using it to teach you anything regarding Pesach. We're using it to teach you regarding the osham, that the osham is different. So he says only after you roasted the fats. But if you didn't do it, it's still kosher. So the same thing over here. Okay, I guess we'll stop over here.